Hello, everybody! It is us, Irrational Radio, here with another episode of Table 13. This episode, we are gonna get philosophical. Deeply, intensely philosophical. About something that actually I've talked about at a few tables while role-playing. And it is the discussion of, is necromancy the art or science of raising corpses from the dead or commanding undeath inherently evil? Me and Eric have discussed this a little bit at length, and we are going to share that discussion with you here because we're not done. We'll never be done discussing this. I mean, in 20 years, we could have this conversation again and bring up new, interesting points. Have I mentioned that me and Eric met in college while we were both going for philosophy? Because that's what happened here. So that's actually the people you've been listening to.
Sitting here talking about souls and stuff. Could not be more in our wheelhouse.
Oh man, we've got stuff for you. So this is a question that often gets asked. It's like there is a necromancer outside of town, and when you say something like that, it is like there's a necromancer outside of town. Go stop him from being a necromancer.
Yeah,
go
just inherently bad.
Disrupt him in some way. And there's never like, oh, the good necromancer in town. Oh, go visit the necromancer. He's a good guy. It's not usually represented like that.
Yeah, and I think that's the other. There's this huge. It's very much one of the just like, okay, that's a baddie that I don't have to worry about. They're faceless enemies. If there's undead involved, that means it's evil, and I can go like bam,
bop it.
Yeah. I think that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, well, either or. It's just something that. But like again, you can have a wizard. Your wizard in your party can have necromancer, can be a necromancer, and they are there's nothing in that says, oh, if you take this school you are an evil wizard.
Yeah,
while it's still, as you pointed out, the way you get half of the monster manual. It is because of necromantic magic there are a lot of these undead monsters running around. You're not. There's like, what, 4 fire monsters,
Yes.
A couple of water monsters, lots of dead monsters.
There's a lot of dead monsters.
A lot of
the
dead
element is well represented.
Well represented. Yes, the 5 elements. Yes. Wind, water, earth, fire, dead.
Dead.
Nice. So we want to start this conversation with discussing what some spells that deal with life and death talk about, and how almost the mechanics of the necromantic magic as represented in the Forgotten Realms / D&D 5e / the D&D systems in general. There is some interesting things that we've found here. Eric, if you'd like to begin with this kind of discussion here.
Yeah. I guess there's the argument raised that they're nothing more than just like a gross robot, or it's the same thing as manipulating constructs or whatever. I've heard that suggested. That really you're not doing anything more than the creation bard or whatever is when they get the lights, candlesticks to dance around on the table. It just isn't as sanitary.
Right, and I push back a little bit too, is that, like bodies are kind of inherently owned by the people they used to be part of, so it's kind of akin to theft in a way,
There is that and most, like definitely a lot of places have laws against,
right.
really just interfering with corpses. That's how it's phrased in a lot of places. It doesn't matter what, it's supposed to be a corpse. It just lays there. That's all it's supposed to do.
You can get in trouble for raising a corpse. You can also get in trouble for dressing a corpse up like a marionette and dancing them through the square too, using just pulleys and ropes. Okay. So, it's not necessarily the magic. It's that it has to do with corpsiness. But,
that's a good point, is that, it's whatever, great-grandfather Jeb who's being walked. It's not the same as just like a random faceless ghoul or something. It's like, oh my god, I went to his funeral. Like, that's fucked.
Exactly.
Get out of here.
Yeah, and even so, it is marionetting with
Yeah.
dead stuff, you know.
And
But
so if you attach that to the corpse alone, there's something to be said about that. But I think beyond that, once you start looking at the way some of the spells are written and some of the language coordinates, there are some suggestions, some sort of implications of what you could consider like an inherently evil system. I don't
right,
think it's required by the way the mechanics work, but there is a reading which allows for it, at the very least. Starting with it, one of the big ones that people are going to use in defense is animate dead, because
right,
the phrasing of the spell is that it's a foul mimicry. You imbue the target, which is specified as the corpse, with a foul mimicry of life, and you raise it as an undead creature. Um, that is like, right there, the reading of that says it's not necessarily the same life that it had in whatever normal state of animation it had, um, but it doesn't say that there's no connection of identity or anything like
right.
that, I guess. And then it's more importantly, it is not like a will-less being.
Okay,
um, After every 24 hours with the animate dead spell, you have to reassert your control over your undead, minions, by casting the spell again. And if you fail, they don't listen to you anymore, and they go off and do their own undead thing,
right,
which is suggests that there's its own, at least, like, animating will there. There is like some
right.
identity that you're suppressing, when
Which
you command it around and stuff like that, regardless of whether that's attached to the soul of the formerly living
right.
entity or not, isn't really talked about, but it's a thing that
So
exists, I
that's a
guess.
little bit evil. I was gonna say that, even if it's just a zombie spirit, we'll get into that. But if it's like,
Right,
the
yeah.
spirit or like life energy, I guess, you forced into this body and you are suppressing its free will or its ability to act under its own will, I think that that does kind of count as pretty evil, or at least,
If your argument
yeah,
is that enchantment's worse because it's doing that to living things, what is the difference between
right,
doing that to a
yeah,
living thing and doing it to this undead thing here? Which, yeah, create undead has its. I think you're making ghouls instead of like zombies or skeletons, but it's the same language basically. They don't talk about the foul mimicry of
right.
life stuff, but they do talk about every 24 hours you have to reassert your control over them. Otherwise, they kind of do their own thing. They don't listen to you
Yeah,
anymore.
it sounds almost
Um,
animalistic, like it's same as if you
right.
like charmed a bear or a horse, after that
Yeah.
spell wore off, it's gonna continue to be a bear or a horse. It's gonna just not be under your control anymore. But, when you do this, it doesn't suddenly wake up and become a Uncle Jeffrey. It's still a zombie at the end of that 24 hours. It's just no
Exactly.
longer your zombie. It's its
They just
own damn zombie.
and I assume, like, by the strictest reading of that text, then it would just stand there, like, basically,
Right.
and defend itself. I think for both of those spells, the way it's worded, if you don't command them, they don't take any action. They
Right.
just will defend themselves if someone attacks them. Um, but I
Ooh.
don't know what normal undead behavior is
Right.
otherwise. So,
That's
I
definitely
mean,
DM Fiat,
eh,
or Fiat.
sure.
It's
Yeah,
up.
like, I mean, maybe they do just stand around until
Right.
they're disturbed. And then, like, adventurers are even more jerks just for coming in and, like, wiping out a bunch of zombies. They just
Yeah.
literally just stand around and, like, maybe pace steps this way
Yeah.
and groan a bit, pace 3 steps this way and groan a bit, because they don't need anything.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so they're not, I mean, unless I think, like, ghouls and ghasts and stuff might eat, so
So
they
okay,
could
but
be
then that
like, but
argument
regardless,
is if you're like, okay, so I have this zombie, I'm suppressing this zombie's will to get it to do stuff. Is it really that evil if it wasn't gonna do anything with its willpower anyway? Like it's basically
hey,
just a blank slate at that
if
point, right?
I want to sit in my house and do nothing, and you making me go outside and do some shit, like,
Right,
I've
but
got feelings
okay,
about it,
here's
I
where we're gonna
guess.
get
But
philosophical though,
right,
because like the zombie only has the one choice. It doesn't get a choice to operate will in a different way other than just stand there and shuffle back and
just because
forth.
that's how it exercises its will doesn't mean that it can't exercise exercise otherwise. It would not. It has a sense of self-preservation. It does defend itself when it's threatened by outside forces or what have you,
That's
right? So
that's
there's
true. Yeah.
something there. Um,
Right.
it's funny talking about a dead thing having self-preservation.
Right? Yeah, self-preservation instincts. Yes,
but
this dead spirit does. So okay, well that is interesting. So it might
so
not be like a false choice kind of dichotomy where the zombie has will, but the will is only directed towards one thing, and you're just
yeah, it at
yeah,
least doesn't require that. But even if you allow that, you're creating an entirely new like identity when you
right,
pump whatever into there. There is at least the suggestion that you're subverting some sort of,
yeah.
whatever inherent like force of will that it would have, and that stuff kind of just suggestive. And well, if it's normal desires to go around and eat brains or something, then maybe you're doing it a
A
service
better thing, but then
by
you created the thing in the first place that wants to wander around and eat brains. So, you're not doing that
right.
good of stuff either.
Yeah,
So,
and there's a potential every 24 hours that it goes loose, and so really,
right,
yeah, there
yeah.
isn't a whole lot of argument
So, I mean,
there.
honestly,
Um,
though, like by itself, though, that spell is not necessarily inherently evil. It might be distasteful in the same way that, like making an ox plow a field is distasteful. It's still
right,
the same kind of thing. You are forcing this animal to do something that it probably wouldn't do if you didn't put it in
right.
like this situation and make it run around. And if it's not
But there
the
are a lot of different ways that you can get an ox to plow a field. You can do that by being a total ass. I mean, it's going to be unpleasant for the ox, probably in some
probably
sense,
either way, yes, yeah.
but you could probably there are ways to make that less.
Right,
I
but
guess is the concept I'm
it's
working with
not
here.
like that is splitting hairs in terms of I think like
Right.
the moral like level. You're
Yes.
still getting something that doesn't have a ton of intelligence to do manual labor by forcing it. There are nicer and better ways, but I'm sure like there are nice and better ways of communicating with your zombie pals too. Like
Right.
are you the kind of necromancer that's like go do my bidding, or if you're like hey guys we're gonna
How do you
go
guys feel
yeah
about? And it's like, we're zombies. You're
yeah
controlling
you're
our will.
controlling your will. So yeah, and I feel like that's nicer, right, than just
it's
just
it's
not
definitely
just forcing
scarier.
them. Yeah.
Like,
So I do think but that does have a lot of potential to be misused by less than savory individuals. So it's a lot like like heroin. It's not necessarily evil in itself. It's just in the whole situation. It's evil.
okay.
Like yeah, like
So just about every other aspect
right,
of it, other
exactly.
than
Like
the thing
Necker, I think
itself.
at
I
least
get where
with
you're
this
coming
spell,
from on it.
it's
It's like,
just a spell that makes a corpse walk. Under some situations, that is good. You want that. In
I
fact, it
will
would be better if
I
that
will suggest that there are, okay, so to come at those from a slightly different angle and suggest that that's maybe not the case. Spells like Resurrection,
okay,
they have a qualification that that the target isn't undead currently,
right,
or hasn't been raised as an undead, depending on the spell, depending on the phrasing. But that right there implies that you are stopping someone in a world where resurrection exists. You're making it so that that person can't be raised from the dead.
right.
Um,
Also,
and
kind of evil.
little evil, if
Yeah,
especially if it's, I mean, if it's to save the world and it's a cause that,
right,
whatever great, Grandpa Jeb or whatever would have happily given his life for again.
right.
Maybe it's not quite as bad, but if it's to like move your couch or something, then it's pretty not great.
It's not great. But
Um,
again, I would argue that getting any living thing to move your couch without adequate, benefit is probably just as bad, right? So
I guess,
it
yeah,
all
there's
it
that.
honestly makes me want to go
Without,
through like some of the artificer stuff and seeing if you're like you're like mechanical beast actually wants
do
to
they
follow
have?
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Are
are
you
you
being
just
just
like
as big of a jerk?
yeah,
Like,
exactly. Have you just summoned this mechanical spirit and are like binding it
what
to
am
your own
I?
will? Yeah, like are you just a necromancer of metal? Like, those are some interesting
You do
conversations.
get into these things when you're talking about, yeah, there are some very sketchy parts that are involved in this.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, they do kind of distinguish between the corpse and the undead creature that's raised after it.
Right.
But since we're just talking about resurrection, true resurrection doesn't have that qualification
Yep.
of that they can't be undead. It actually will target like it'll turn the creature back into a live. It'll like return it to regular life or
Yeah.
whatever. And it is one of the only places that you can find the text talk about
That
the
connection.
undead creature, yeah,
Yeah.
and the living, the living entity that used to inhabit it, or whatever, being the same thing, and referencing it as one deal, and talking about restoring it to its non-undead form rather than returning the soul to its body and killing off the undead creature,
Right.
something like that. Which would be much more cumbersome language, which is, I'm sure, why they really phrase it this way. But it suggests a connection there between the two on some level, at least. If you can
Right.
return it to its original state, then it must have been in an altered state,
Right.
changed into that altered state when you brought it back.
Yeah.
So, that foul semblance of life. Is that some awful, like, manipulation, lobotomy, whatever you've done to the soul as you jam it back into the body? Yeah, it doesn't return
Right.
it, like, it doesn't return it in the normal sense. It doesn't qualify as they would say it should, or something like that.
Though
It's not resurrection, but
to push back on that a little
sure.
bit, whereas like true resurrection, or I guess resurrection, the soul is free and willing in order to inhabit the thing and can't be undead. So if the soul has to be free in specifics, it is not the case with the raised dead. The soul can be in any situation and the foul mimicry of life is still here. So if you need parts of the original soul to create this foul mimicry of
That's an
life,
important point.
then the soul has to be available. If the soul is locked away somewhere, if the soul is like pulled out of the body and stuffed somewhere like a vault or something, you can still raise the body. You
And you can
can't
still
do
animate
so
dead
with the
on it or
resurrection.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's a
And
good
and
point.
imbue it with a foul resurrection. So then it
Sure.
becomes okay. So maybe you're not lobotomizing that soul, that
Yeah.
body's soul. Maybe you're just like lobotomizing life energy. You're just, and I think that that's kind of really how I would view that. Is that it's a foul mimicry of life. It's like it's life energy that isn't supposed to be there, which is why it's like a foul mimicry.
It's maybe
Um,
not fully capable. It's not like a soul, but it's the closest
right.
approximation someone who lacks, like, whatever god
Yeah.
powers can
can
come up
can
with or
give,
something.
and so it's not, yeah, it's like building a computer out of, like scrap. It'll work,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the best like thing for the stuff. And so and again, I don't think that that's necessarily inherently evil. I know foul mimicry of life is some pretty negative language, but again, I think that that's more of like a
It's a
like
commentary on the quality of
right,
the whatever soul approximation it is that you've jammed back in there to get it
right,
to do your bidding. So there's
yeah,
something to be said about that, that it at least is not required. Um, but I think that, so there's some other things that we can connect the dots on here. But the next major step for me is the way that Speak with Dead works.
yeah. I wanted you to bring this one up.
Yeah, because it is like, strangely, it has some of the more meat. It's not direct in the way it discusses a lot of things, but if you read this and then read some of the other ones,
Yeah,
it informs a little more potentially on the state of mind that they have when they talk about
right,
souls, maybe. But the big thing is that, so it says you're granting a semblance of life and intelligence to the creature. So it is not, and then it specifies that you don't return the creature's soul to its body, and then clarifies only its animating spirit. It doesn't say what the hell
yeah,
that means, but it does talk a little bit about what that animating spirit is capable of.
Yeah.
Which suggests that it's at least part of the identity of the original creature. The corpse can't learn new information, and also it's another place where they're very strict about referencing the corpse, not the creature. It's
Right.
not the soul of the living creature that you're talking to, it's the corpse. So there's something to be said there as well. Uh, but the corpse can't learn new information, doesn't comprehend anything that's happened since it's died, and it can't speculate about future events. So it's not able to like learn or kind of grow,
Yep.
which is something that people would attach with sort of that like soul identity
Right.
thing, the motivating bit that makes all of us us. Um, but it can answer the questions that you ask it, obviously, and it can recognize hostile action and people that were enemies in its life. So there is some sort of body of experience that's connected to this animated spirit if it can answer your questions and if it can tell that you were once its enemy and that it doesn't want to tell you the truth anymore or something like that. Also, it can decide things,
Right.
which suggests again that there is something of what we attach to a soul in what you're bringing back to the body.
So I have an interesting theory here. So, whereas the animate dead is like you stuffing the I guess like the hijacking the body of of a dead thing, just the body part of the dead thing to move it
Right.
around like a marionette, and like it has a will as so much as it is willful in that it wants to move, like it can move. If you're like move over there, it can will its body over there. Whereas speak with dead, you're hijacking the mind portion of this dead object. So its soul isn't there, but you're plugging enough stuff back in to at least get the brain, synapses firing in the same way that they were firing when the soul was inside of it, which is we're getting into even more of the fun, the
Exactly.
mind body problem. Whereas, like, how does a soul influence a soul, which is a decidedly non-physical thing? We haven't in the Forgotten Realms. It's not like, yes, when you die, you lose a pound as your soul seeps out of your body. There is
It's comprised mostly of mercury or
yeah,
whatever,
exactly.
like
Like it
they
is
don't know.
decidedly non-physical, but it still affects a physical system in a way that, as causal relation, a soul is in the body, therefore the body moves, which is a cause and effect. But a non-physical system, by its very definition of being non-physical, cannot affect physical systems on a causal basis. Otherwise, it would be a physical thing. So you have
At
this,
some point, there's this translation
right?
problem that has to and what you've done here, like that's the thing is it's like okay, so how can you get at what can you get at by not returning the soul?
Right.
Just by turning, putting more power back in to fire up the synapses,
That's what I'm
whatever.
thinking.
How
It's
much
like,
of that is created without the, yeah, I guess without like actually
right.
attaching what is the identity of that
It's
person.
almost like
So
the riverbed and the ice and the river, where you have a pattern that's created by energy running through a medium, and then when the water freezes, you can separate the water from the paths that it made, and they both exist separately. And if you poured the water into the medium, you would have the same movement, but it wouldn't be the same water as made the channels in the first place. So in this analogy, the soul has this framework that it had in the body, and so it has the memories, it has the all the things, but it's separate from the body. And this new energy you're putting through the body has
yeah,
now formed
expands
the
to fill
same
the vessel
channels.
or whatever.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And so in that case, it can't actually change anything because it's either not powerful enough or it's the wrong kind of energy. All it does is allow you to see the shape of the mind that was there when it died, which is kind of what it says here. And this allows too
if
for
it didn't say its animating spirit.
That's
If
my
it said
that is
an
my
animating
biggest.
spirit.
I think that is
But the
honestly.
problem is
Yeah,
that it does
it's
attach possession to
but it's
the
not its
entity of the
soul.
formerly
What
living,
the then?
and somehow it's not its soul. Exactly. So
That's
how can you pull
garbage.
that off of the soul if it's something that there is as deep
Yeah,
of an interplay between the two as like your body of experience and your ability to
right.
grow from those
I mean,
experiences?
so the way I want to just
What's
answer
left can't
that
be a
is
functional
saying no,
soul,
no,
I
no.
guess.
See, that's like saying the spell the pump doesn't return the gas to the car, only its fuel tank, or the other way around, I guess. The spell doesn't return the fuel tank to its body, only the gas. And so it's like the animating spirit is the fuel that goes into the thing's gas tank, but it's not the same stuff, I guess. I hate that they put its there. It
Yep.
really makes a whole argument fall apart because
It's
it's
yeah,
yeah.
that makes it, and that's the thing. That's what I was saying. So if it's Speak with Dead, people are like, it's whatever. It's a second level spell. People don't even really use it that much, but it has some of the biggest,
Yeah.
kind of most meaningful implications for
Because
a lot of
it
this
doesn't
when
have
you
that
take it
thing
into
too.
coordination
Like
with the
so,
rest of the spells.
like again too. It also doesn't carry with like if you cast Speak with Dead, you can then resurrect the thing afterwards. Like with regular resurrection, you're not making it undead either. So
Well, but it can't be targeting a creature who is currently
who is
undead.
currently or was undead when it died? Or
So
yeah,
why is that? Is there
yeah,
some interplay that's happening here? Does this spell, if you cast Speak with Dead on someone, are they
yeah.
is that until you ask that third question or the spell ends, are they a free spirit or whatever, an
Just
untethered,
in a
whatever it is to qualify
body.
those? Are they able to no, I mean, as far as like the soul that is free and willing to qualify for
Oh, right,
resurrection
right.
kind of thing, for
While you're
that.
doing this, yeah,
Um,
because that was the
does this
question.
tie
Yeah,
them up?
I,
Does it
I
tie up some part of it? Does it? And so it's
you resurrect your dad, but he doesn't have his animating spirit, so he's just laying there. Like, he
sorry,
looks
he
dead,
doesn't remember
but
any of you.
everything else is in there. I
Man,
promise.
huh?
Like, yeah,
Ugh.
yeah. See,
But
that comes to
yeah,
mind. Okay, so does the Forgotten Realm spirits have different parts? Or there is like the animating spirit, the memory part of the spirit, the
yes,
like, can you wipe a spirit's memory then? Because wiping
uh-huh.
a mind changes its physical system. How do you wipe a spirit's memory? How do you remove a the idea of removing something from something that isn't a thing is painful to
Yep, that's
comprehend.
it's
And they
dividing by
forced my
zero.
hand by saying only its animating spirit. Its animating spirit. The like and
Not
it's not talking about the corpse either. It's talking about the
exactly
creature's animating
the
spirit.
soul. Yeah,
This
because
just
it.
bits of the stuff.
So,
Like, I
um,
hate it.
you're talking about parts of the soul, and that's another one that's kind of funny. Astral projection is another
Oh,
necromancy spell that
yes.
I just stumbled across while I was looking for these other sort of things that talk about souls, so I can say that they stand one way or the other. It doesn't help a ton as far as telling you, an answer to any of these questions. It really just screws the whole
Whole thing even
situation up a
further.
little more. But it talks about this silvery cord that appears when you astral project, and it's the connection between your astral projection, which is like basically suggested to be your soul. It's the tether back to your material body. And yeah, and that's if anything cuts that, your soul is separated from your body. It says, and that kills you instantly.
No, I just
Um,
figured out what that silvery cord is.
uh,
That's your animating spirit.
That's what I was. Yes,
That's your
like
animating spirit.
is
Yep.
that the animating spirit?
Yep.
Is there some? Is it the glue that
Yeah.
holds your identity
It's
into your
that's what they did.
corporeal
Okay,
form?
that's the answer to the mind body problem. Obviously, the way that the spirit
There's
and the
just a
body makes
turtles all the way
connection
down,
is
bro.
us animating
Spirits,
spirit.
more spirit.
Obviously,
Yeah.
yeah. That doesn't help.
What attaches your soul
Yeah,
to
the
your body?
animating
Well, it's this smaller, different kind of
different
soul
kind of
that's
spirit.
slightly
Yeah,
different and
you
only
can
does this
use
one
though,
thing.
but this spirit you can use to talk to the body without actually needing the soul at all. You just suck that in there, you just fold it back in, stuff it down in its head, and then continue on. Oh, I think I lost Eric.
Yep. Also,
Yep.
so another leaves your body in a suspended state of animation. When is the phrase that, or a state of suspended animation is the phrase that they use. Which yes, it does lead into that suggestion that like maybe this is like yeah, that's maybe that silver cord is a third part of the soul,
Right?
or the whatever the mind body conglomerate, the thing that makes a person. But if you're just stuffing one of those back into a zombie, that makes it go. Like I don't get it.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
mean,
understand.
it
So
it's not for mortal men to understand, but
that's
wizards
a good
found
point,
out
actually. Yeah,
that
this is God
I
stuff.
can
What am I?
I can just see a wizard just like astral projecting. He sees the silvery cord. He's like, what can I do with this?
What the
And
fuck is
he goes
that?
finds a
Just
townsman
start
and just
sticking
like,
it in dead bodies.
yeah, exactly, yeah, just oh wow. Okay, so when I shove this, when I just detach the spirit and just shove the silvery cord back in the body, it comes back just as a living body, but without anything, and then I just let my will, get in there.
Weird.
It's really weird. It doesn't answer any problems, but thinking about that almost solves a few of like how the mechanics work on some of these spells.
If you think about that tether as a thing that exists for everybody, whether or not their soul is currently inhabiting their body, there's something there.
Yeah.
Um,
And it also only works if when the body or the creature dies, that silvery tether stays connected to their body and not their soul. Because if it's connected to their soul, all the things that are problem with the soul go away.
but how do you? Yeah, I guess if that's just off in the nether and it like what or aether, I
Yeah,
guess.
it would the analogy I'm gonna
Huh.
look at it is it's like the
Okay.
body is the anchor, the silvery cord is the chain, and the spirit is the ship. When the chain breaks on the ship, and when like chain and ship
The ship still
break,
functions,
yeah, and floats off,
sailing the
right.
multiverse or
Whereas
what
the
have
anchor
you.
is stuck in the place and the chain is tailing off in the current. And so if you are a wizard and you wrap the chain back around the anchor, suddenly the anchor floats to the surface of the water and now acts kind of like a ship.
Yeah.
But it's a foul mimicry because all you've done is wrap a chain in an anchor and then called it
It's
a thing.
I think it's like you blow up a
There
balloon
you
or
go.
something and
Yeah.
attach it to the chain and let it float to the surface and act like
Act like a
a,
ship.
it's the
Yeah.
ship at the end of the anchor.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's the least like morally terrible one.
Right.
But the other side of it is that there's never a that never severs because you can
Right.
always be resurrected. It assumes that that's
Ah,
what they're
that's a
pulling
good
on to bring your
idea.
soul back in.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Okay.
that they're just using you. They're just tying you up in that and then stuffing you into the body before they animate your corpse as an undead
Right.
zombie that's only capable of, very very basic function or
Oh
following
man, yeah,
directions.
that's super duper evil.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
but we are what 5 after 11 here.
yep.
Do we?
Yep.
Is that our
We
break?
we
When do we
sometimes
go?
yeah, I think 11 actually 11:15 usually is when we take the break to go to
Oh,
11:30,
well, I
right?
broke it then.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I mean, that's fine. We can go ahead and take a break. I think that's actually more in the middle than 11:15. So, yeah, we can go ahead and drop 11:05. So, thank you guys for watching. This has been an interesting Table 13 episode. Not a whole lot of tabletop roleplay discussion, a lot more philosophy, but this is stuff that has come up in my games, and I have spent a few hours around playing tables just shouting philosophy at one another because I think that a piece of the system should work in a certain way because of how I understand it in my mind. And so I think when we come back, we're going to kind of discuss how DMs can
Yeah.
range their homebrewed worlds to reflect necromancy in different lights that may be more positive or much more negative than what Forgotten Realms does with their soul
Spend
stuff.
some time exploring
Yeah.
how and why people have the sort of assumptions
Yeah.
that they have, and what you could connect from the way undead or necromancy works.
Right.
And there's some really small changes you can make to completely flip those one way or the other, like a word here and there,
Yep.
and you've totally got like a benevolent, like, no, we just bring them back from as zombies because we don't have access to true resurrection.
Right. They're fine. Like,
Yeah, like they're nice. It's cool. Like I tell them to be free, and they do what they want. I don't know. Anyway, sorry.
all right. Well, we will be back in 15 minutes to continue our interesting conversation about necromancy. Goodbye.
And
So you did mention theater of the mind versus always. So you did mention theater of the mind versus always having maps out, and
Yeah.
that's another thing. Not every DM is either willing or able to do a full theater of the mind combat system, and not every player is going to be okay with that. Some people want to see the actual layout. They want to see the images. They want to see the map. They want to see the distance. They want it all, particularly plotted, which is not a bad thing. You do need to know beforehand whether your DM is going to be doing that or not.
As a DM, I rarely map unless it's combat, but frequently combat's just a grid so that everybody knows how far away they are from everything. Though for me, because it's just easier to keep everything straight, I think. As a player, I find it very difficult to, especially with the way combat and most of the abilities are structured in D&D, it's pretty hard to feel like I'm keeping track of exactly what all's happening and going on, and how close am I to this person in relation to this person, and stuff like that can matter pretty quickly sometimes, in some, depending on your campaign. But there are ways to run combat that totally don't rely on those kind of specific distinctions. You can kind of just do the bands, range bands of combat or something that they've introduced into these other systems that take away the specific, what square am I questions. And yeah, that's a big difference in play, and how the spells and abilities your characters have translate into what you can kind of do during the combat, or during outside of combat, stuff like that.
Welcome to Big Seed's General Store. We have the largest selection of fantasy-based items on this side of the greater Dandaris River. Why don't we go inside and check out what I have for sale? Let's go. We are now inside Big Seed's General Store. Let's see what I have for sale. Well, this sure looks like a fine selection. We have bananas, onions, dragon eggs, pajama pants, occult statues, daggers, dangerous animals, socks, small figurines, real fake daggers, diplomas, drink koozies, hammers, potatoes. Well, that's just a small bit of our inventory. So you should do yourself a favor and come on down to Big Seed's General Store, where we will treat you like you want to be treated.
As a player, you also need to know what type of game you want to be in.
Yeah.
Whereas a DM is saying, this is the type of game I want to run. Let me find players that fit this.
Right.
As a player, you need to know what type of game you want to be in. And I think, like it goes back to what I was saying, inexperienced players won't exactly know the terminology. So basically the two sides of the spectrum is sandbox and railroad. And then everything in between, you know, there's a place for you. And I think that's one thing is maybe some inexperienced players wouldn't understand exactly what those mean. So basically railroad, as you and I know, that's where the DM is going to tell you where to go in not so subtle terms.
Yeah.
Like whether they have, you know, an interesting character walks into the bar and walks up to you, hey, I have a job for you. It needs to be done now. Like, that's pretty much railroad. That's like, hey, here's a quest, go do it. Sandbox is no direction. DM's not going to give you direction. They're going to drop hooks at you. Subtle, sometimes blatant, but they're just going to drop a bunch of hooks. You're in a pond, they're going to throw hooks at you. You do what you want to do. You're in a tavern. They will describe the innkeeper. They'll describe some of the patrons. They'll describe, you know, the environment. They'll describe the band that's playing, the bard that's singing. Some, you know, people are walking in. It's this time of day. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? In a sandbox, I want to talk to this person at this table. I want to talk to the barkeep. I want to look at the board. I want to take part in the band. I want to get drunk. I want to go start a business. You don't have any given direction. There's anywhere you can go.
If you're playing a module, for example, that's probably going to be a little bit more of a railroaded campaign, just because of the necessity of, if you're going to stick to this, you know, structure of plot advancement that's in the book, everybody's going to kind of understand and agree that, like, yeah, when a hook comes up that's clearly pointing toward this main plot line, we're all going to kind of go toward that. And I think that happens in sandbox games after a point as well.
Oh, yeah.
You get to a point where the party has dictated something's interesting to them, and then the DMs, you know, backstopped that a little more and developed a couple more complications or conflicts that are centered around that aspect of the game. It's starting a business or whatever. You know, that can start to become one of those greater arcs. Like, you can have a larger overarching plot that guides the action and still have room for stuff where you can go off and do silly things, and, you know, in the meantime, where maybe, you know, every single action isn't time dependent, so you've got some free time or downtime or whatever that lets you work more along those lines. And so, yeah, obviously these aren't like a binary one or the other thing.
If you're new, generally you would lean towards the railroad side. It gives you more direction. Because as a new player, you're not exactly sure what all of your options are. What can you do?
Right.
What should you do? I mean, do you want to go and talk to somebody? Do you want a quest? Do you want to do nothing? Like, you don't know. You don't know. You're not given a list of things that you can do. As a player, depending on what you want to do, you need a DM that's going to be trying to run that type of game. If you want the direction, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want a story-driven direction, then that's fine. Find a DM that's doing that.
Right.
The world is full of danger. In every environment, there lurks hidden terrors waiting for their chance to strike. Dr. Gregory Parsnips and his team of hardy adventurers have faced some of the worst monstrosities the world has to offer. And lived. Read their harrowing tales and deeds in Dr. Parsnip's new book, a collection of tales detailing the deeds and courses of Dr. Gregory Arthur Parsnips and Company, featuring a multitude of terrifying and monstrous creatures with which conflict is had. Get your copy today.
Look, no, Sam. All right, fine. Captain, I promise. No, I'm taking this very seriously. I'm gonna do it. It's gonna be great. Don't worry. Right here, under the authority of the king, with an announcement, with the intention of serving the public, by the order of the king. I have been instructed to inform you that a small community of goblin refugees from the east have been permitted to live within the borders of the kingdom in compliance with the Green Ear Treaty signed 50 years ago. Which I gotta say, I looked into that and I just want to applaud the stunningly progressive language I found in there. We were only referred to as the murderous little green beasts 7 different times. Great job, everyone. Really, I'm just impressed. It continues. There is no cause for alarm, as the king and his court will be taking every precaution to keep you, your family, and your property safe during this trying time. Yes, because the goblins, that's... that's what you gotta worry about. No, definitely, that's it.
How should players go about determining what kind of style their prospective DM might be looking to implement?
From a player's perspective, there are some questions you should be asking your DM. The setting is a big deal. If you are talking to a DM who's running a setting that all their players, they're going to be joining sort of a guild or a company or a group of people that are like say a den of thieves or a pirate's ship or something. That gives you an idea sort of for the setting. Are they running a module? Are they running homebrew? Are they running some sort of mix? Are they using a pre-made world? Is it their homebrew world? And that'll give you sort of an idea of what they want to do. So what you need to find out is, are the sessions going to be encounter driven? I guess that's the best way to put it. Because asking them, hey, look, is every session going to be combat, or are we going to have opportunities to roleplay? It seems straightforward, but the main thing is, are they building their game to be encounter driven? If a DM is building their game to be encounter driven, then most of the time, not all the time, most of the time it's going to be that you need to defeat these encounters to progress.
Right.
That tends to let you know that it's going to be more combat oriented. Some DMs, and you need to ask them this question: can you solve, will they allow you to solve encounters or even combat encounters? Right. Can you solve these problems with roleplay? Yeah. Do you have that option if your reasoning and your roles line up? Can you solve these things with roleplay? If the answer is yes, then they're allowing for more roleplay. If the answer is no, which is fine, you're going to have to fight. That means they want more combat. And I've been in games where I felt, as a charismatic character, that I could persuade some certain bad guys.
Right.
But the DM had the mindset that, hey,
this is
we have to have combat because it needs to be exciting.
Yes. Oh, no, that's what I was saying. That's a really good way to phrase that, or to like come at that, is by saying, hey, so how often will I be able to talk my way out of whatever mess we find ourselves in, or think my way out of, or because my answer to that is, hey, if it's reasonable, like you're saying, and the dice line up and all that stuff, do it. Whatever. there are no guaranteed combats, right? But I think there are DMs who are going to say, well, there's going to be some situations where you're fighting, the giants in this are just savage, mean monsters.
Yeah.
And they don't want to hear it, and they're not going to talk with you. And that's what you're fighting a lot of the time. So there aren't going to be a lot of situations where maybe you can, convince them that it's not worth fighting or that there's a better alternative. And and I think that is like a really important piece of information to get, and a good way to start to kind of figure out where your DM is as far as players are concerned.
And like I said, there's no right or wrong. It's just finding your fit. It's finding your group. All of it's viable, all of it's fun. But if you want a combat-oriented game and the DM is not doing that, or vice versa, you're going to end up with some issues.
That makes sense.
You're going to end up not having fun, and that's the whole point of it.
That's not great.
Hello, everybody. We are back from break. We were discussing the philosophical ramifications of being a necromancer and if that damns your soul to hell or not. We kind of discovered that in at least the Forgotten Realms and the text that they have given us in several necromantic spells, it's at least as evil as heroin. Maybe a little eviler.
Probably, I think. I don't know. I can't really argue with that.
I think that's my judgment is necromancy is the heroine of the Forgotten Realms series.
I don't know if that's accurate, but it does at least suggest that there are some pretty shady moral implications to involving yourself in the necromantic arts.
People are like, nah, man, you can
like
use
heroin.
one necromantic spell and then you don't have to use it again. Someone else is like, that is a lie. You used
You're
it
never
once.
gonna move a couch by yourself.
Yeah,
Again. Like, it's just
the
I'm
rush
sorry.
of bringing back a squirrel for the first time is amazing.
Oh,
Yes. So,
God.
but I wanted to delve into a little bit of how you as a DM can take some of these ideas and, at least in your homebrew settings, create some really interesting implications for how things like necromancy, for things like healing, and for things like resurrection to actually take place. Because there are a enormous amount of theories on the soul and how to construct what we see in our day-to-day lives as like living people doing living people things that can have interesting implications for things like returning people from the dead that make it more or less evil depending on the system that you're using or depending on how you view the metaphysical system of your world is.
Right.
So yeah, to begin with, I would like to discuss building a system or building a type of necromancy in a universe that has no souls. It is purely a mechanica in terms of people walking around are meat that thinks it's alive. There isn't any energy that is transferred after death. Life immediately ends. There is no, your soul, your identity does not exist past your bodily life. So when you die, you are obliterated. No afterlife whatsoever. But in this world, there is still resurrection. There is still raising the dead. In that system, I think that it is much less evil to resurrect things.
But it is complicated to talk about.
Yes. Incredibly complicated. Yes.
Because I guess you get along the same lines of what you were suggesting for whatever it is, animate dead, as far as that not being evil.
Right.
You're filling the vessel or whatever, you know, the
Right.
energy that's pushed back into the body is just taking on the shape.
Of the identity of the person, or
And
of
that's the function of all the meat working properly.
right, or not working properly, or just working
Right.
barely. You know, like it's a
Yeah.
zombie because it's not super strong energy.
Exactly.
You're only able to activate 20% of the brain, enough to run the brain stem and not much else, but it's not a lot. So the identity of the person is gone. There is no more person. That body is an object. If the family is like, yes, you can take the body and raise it into a
we have no
necromantic work,
intentions of resurrection,
right?
Because
Or
that's
that kind of
easy.
thing.
All it
Yeah.
is basically the soul is an amount of energy, maybe,
Right.
that goes off into some extra dimensional.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Into the cosmos, the multiverse, the whatever, and you're just drawing from that
Right.
when you fill it back up. The weird thing, though, is, I guess, resurrection in that situation.
Yes.
Because
In
I guess
that,
it depends. It's just a better version of the same thing, I guess.
that's my idea. Yeah, it's like true resurrection is a perfect, like you're filling it back in perfectly.
You're
like-
focusing on healing the body.
Right.
And that's where you go.
Oh,
with
there you
that.
go. Yeah.
Is that it's about you get the meat back in working order again so it can properly produce. And
The
since
thing.
you don't do that with Animate Dead or whatever, Create Undead, you don't, the brain's been
Right.
without oxygen for, 10 years or
Right, and
whatever.
so it's
And that's
thing,
bad
yeah.
news. Yeah, it's not capable of producing the same effect. And I think that does work pretty well. And then you
Right.
have basically automatons that rot. And okay, why isn't that? No, okay, it's the same reason. I was going to say, why isn't that zombie then, calling itself Ted and stuff like
Right, it's
the
because
body was?
the stuff that makes Ted got eaten out by a rat, and now the necromancer's just using the brain stem.
Sure,
to
it
prop
does you're still stopping somebody who could potentially resurrect that person
Right.
from being able to do so. You're potentially putting that person, that corpse, in a position where it's deteriorating to a point where it can't be resurrected, or at least can't be as easily.
Right.
But
In a world where true resurrection is rare and only for like the
Sure.
rich and the powerful, maybe zombification is the best way to, like, if your father dies early, the mother pays for the man to get to
Here's the problem.
zombified. Yeah.
true resurrection can work on someone who doesn't have a body anymore.
Okay. All right. Well, then in that case, you are rebuilding a body from scratch. You are putting all the meat, you're putting meat in the right combination of a right pattern to produce the person again.
It's basically the clone spell.
Right. But done
it's-
immediately and instantly, and not
Yeah.
without the pot. Like not without the jar and the growing.
Oh,
You're
that's
just
magic
like
jar. That's a little different.
Oh, okay, but
the clone is like you grow a backup body.
right. That's what I meant. Yeah. Like
Okay.
Yeah,
I guess
like you have to
without
grow
the
it
jar
in
that the
a-
body's
yeah,
growing in. I
yep,
was
yep.
assuming you were talking about
but-
the container that
No,
you
no,
jump
yeah.
from in magic jar.
But no. So in that
Yeah.
case, you're basically making meat that fills all the same. It's a ship of Theseus
So-
idea too. If you
Yeah,
if your
yeah.
ship Theseus burns down completely and then you rebuild it in perfect with different wood, but all the wood is in the same place, it's still gonna function as the same ship.
It's the same crew. It's all the other
right.
things that make it the same.
Yep.
And everybody calls it the same, and it's doing the same routes and all
stuff.
those other
So
things. Is it a different ship,
Right.
really? Just because the junk that makes it up isn't the same.
Right.
I think there's something there. I guess, yeah, it's magic, so it doesn't really matter where that copy comes from or
Right.
how it's perfect. Because
Because-
you
yeah.
you have their true name or whatever, you can associate
Right.
it with that's supposed to be their
That pattern or
their
whatever.
pattern. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. representation. So yeah, I think that it doesn't. That was the big one. I was like, okay, so actually that's because of sort of the functionalism side of things. There, it puts you in a position where the body's required. But since you can just spawn it out of nowhere, which is funny because you're making it out of presumably that same magical energy
Right.
that you're jamming into dead bodies or whatever.
Just in different form, I suppose. You're just,
And
I mean,
it's just
in that,
coalescing into matter. I mean, it's the same way all other magic would function.
yeah,
in that
that's
world,
how I would
probably.
argue it. Is yeah, it's just magic is a
Yeah.
pool of supernatural energy that has a physical effects, and one of those physical effects is if you put meat in a certain situation, it becomes conscious. Like magical energy starts seeping into
So
it, and it
what
wakes
are
up.
gods and stuff? Are there any divine entities
I mean,
in that world?
I don't
Does
know.
that
Yeah,
world
that's
allow for that?
that's interesting, and I think that would be something that you could explore. And then one of the things that maybe would be the case is God's bodies aren't meat; they're like planets or like star systems or
Or
you know,
planes?
or planes. Yeah, and then their soul is the energy that inhabits
Huh.
that plane as conscious as the magic would inhabit a body. So you're just, it's
Huh.
the many ways to build a clock argument is that in
Could
identity.
they go around and snatch up the energy before it disperses into the greater pool then, and maybe have little mini?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, like maybe that's like the way a super new universe works, one that
Right.
hasn't had a ton of time
The
for
ton of
divine
death yet.
entities to
Yeah.
run around. I'm not sure that time works on that scale, but that's not important. Um,
But that would be really interesting in terms of making these magical big effects and abilities still function in a way that, where there isn't souls, but there is magic still.
well, and like maybe there's this weird, like that could be a weird campaign arc where you're either trying to stop the person who's trying to, give their god enough power to create an afterlife for everybody to stop this aimless
God.
pool of soul
Yeah.
nonsense, or working to help so that people can have eternal life in whatever domain they're most aligned with or whatever.
Interesting.
That's a campaign arc that can
Yeah.
happen where, after level 15 you can stop worrying about dukes and kings and stuff and start saying, okay, let's leave our mark on the cosmos.
Right.
Like let's
You have to
let's
stop God from building heaven. Go. Like,
Supernatural season like 10 plus.
Right, yeah.
It's like find Cthulhu, punch him in the mouth.
So that's one interesting way of constructing a universe and answering these questions. The next way is, I think, the classic: the spirit is indomitable, and only spirits can inhabit bodies. So, as in, you cannot split a spirit.
Yeah.
You can only take it in or out of a body, and a spirit can only interact with a body. And you could even go further and say a spirit, in this case, is where all magic comes from, and it's personally owned by like itself, and the
So
body that it inhabits is like its home, I guess you could say.
And so the body's kind of attached to this partition of the greater
Right.
web of energy that's out there. People would have variable size partitions to, like
Right.
the barbarian's not going to have as much or the same kind
As
at
the
their disposal as
sorcerer.
a sorcerer
Yeah.
or, the wizard or the whatever. The wizard could not even use their own, maybe.
Right,
That's how
yeah.
wizards work. I don't know. But yeah, that's an interesting side of things. The unsplittable soul, strictly as the spells are written, gives you some issues with stuff like, mainly speak with dead.
Yeah.
Because
Moral issues, I think that. Yeah. So
if it's unsplittable, it implies that, the way that spell's written does imply that there is some sort of split that happens.
No. Not necessarily. You're just jamming that portion of the soul into the body while leaving the rest of the soul dangling. You're only it's like, You know, the car isn't in the pool, only its tires are. You know, it's okay, yeah,
Okay.
but that's, you know, and then the ramifications of that are awful. Like, what does it feel like to only have the animation part of your spirit shoved into a body while your conscious mind is left outside,
I
while
think that
still
works
being
better
connected?
along. Well, that's one way to do it. Or you could go back to that tether thing that
Right,
astral projection was talking about and go
right.
that route where you're saying that it's this conduit back to some amount of the soul
Now, see,
that you're
astral
able to
projection
tether.
is where that first universe breaks down. I'm not sure that you could have astral projection in a world where there isn't a spirit, because there is nothing you can't. You can't
But if you can exert enough for whatever magical oomph
force. Yeah,
to maintain a contiguous thing, isn't that the same way that any divine entity would work, I guess,
yeah.
right?
Okay,
Couldn't you just
sure.
do
Yeah,
what they do?
yeah. Basically,
Um,
force your consciousness into it, like existing on another physical system while leaving the
right.
physical system of your body behind.
Or just transferring your consciousness into a sort of whatever contiguous field of this energy that
Right.
isn't attached direct or
Well,
that's still tethered but not
right.
bound by
See, that's
uh
getting really close to just having a soul anyway.
exactly.
Yeah, which is why that's where it gets little
If
dicey
you're
a little bit.
strong enough, you have a soul is kind of a cool
Right.
system
I mean,
though.
that is interesting. Yeah, that is
That's
interesting.
kind of a cool idea because it leads to this almost like Norse
Yeah.
mythos where you've got people who can attain godhood through whatever,
Sheer force of will. Yeah, just
Yeah,
any sheer
exactly.
force
Basically
of
just
will.
being badass and
Yeah.
like deciding that that's what you want, which kind of cool.
Yeah.
Um, but
But I
but things
suppose
like Speak with Dead here,
yeah.
I think, yeah, unless you're able to sort of partition the soul, which to
Yeah.
me, it's getting into this, are you separating it or
Yeah.
not kind of thing, on some level. But I think, maybe just putting them in there without the ability to enact any will,
Right.
and but they still have the ability to lie. Ugh, it's weird. I don't know. There, I think the tying up their soul and stuffing it back with this animating spirit and
Yeah.
stuffing that whole package back in is the best analogy I can come up with
Right.
in that universe
If
at
the
least.
soul can't be split.
If you
Yes.
can't
Yeah.
split them, because there is some sort of slight difference that has to happen, I
Right.
think, if you can't split up the soul,
But
just for that. But
again,
that's a
I think
small
like
piece.
in my idea that makes necromancy the most evil. If
Yeah.
the soul can't be split and you're still arriving at these effects, then you're doing horrendous things to that object's soul, like the thing that they are connected to, like the thing that their body
Yeah.
is connected to by necessity. Um,
Unless, I guess, just some of the animate deads don't necessarily, if you're able to still generate that, if that's not, if that you could still provide that animating spirit through some sort of like lackluster power source, kind of along the same lines, there's still a way
sure,
for that to work
yeah.
with the soul that's
But
unsplittable.
then the soul is still bound to the body, but you're not using the spirit to move the body
Yeah.
around, I suppose.
Yeah, it's something to do with the animating that
Yeah,
tether, I think, comes back into play, and it
right.
like turns that back on. And there's still something that's happening there, then that you're confining the
Yeah,
soul on some level. So yeah, I think you're right. There's basically not a lot of ways to do that don't amount to pretty evil if the soul isn't something that you can either recreate or
split.
kind of. Well,
Yeah,
even splitting though,
that's
that's the other
still
side. Is
probably
if you're
bad. Yeah,
yeah, like what are you taking away and what's left, and how is that affecting what's
yeah,
left? What is that like? I don't know. Ugh.
yeah. Not
Um,
not great. Not great at all.
that is an
Yeah,
interesting suggestion though.
And so
and then I
then,
guess you move into that sort of like, yeah, the
right.
splittable like soul with parts is the necessary
I mean, I
component.
actually I'm gonna read. That is probably the evilest universe to be a necromancer. If your universe has souls that are attached to bodies and they're split into parts, and even worse, you can like the sensation of your soul splitting or being split is horrible, is a bad sensation, and you don't want to feel it. Then a necromancer, like stripping your spirit of its stripping your soul of its animating spirit and shoving it back into your body. There really isn't a good justification for doing that to a person. I don't even like that's like, you know, giving someone permission, like even if your grandpa has died and you're like, oh yeah, go ahead and resurrect him. That's basically giving them permission to torture him, like,
Right.
and that's like, I don't see people being able to give people permission to torture one another.
It's like,
That
let me damn their soul for the
right,
eternity
yeah,
that it
exactly.
is while
Like I
they're
have just
being in service.
desiccated
It's
this
like,
soul,
yeah.
like, they could have been, this and this, but no, I split them into bits and shoved the bits into other parts and made those parts dance for me. Like that's not okay.
Everybody
Like,
watch Red vs. Blue.
yeah, right. Please do.
If you don't get that reference, I'm
Watch
not
Red
going to
versus
connect
Blue.
it in any way,
Yeah.
but you should watch that show. Oh.
But
Anyway,
yeah,
sorry.
that kind of thing, that's evil. Like, all of these spells become pretty evil at that point, especially when, like the foul mimicry of life is exactly what you say. You're basically shoving in a lobotomized soul back into the body. Like, okay,
That becomes
I'm going to
messed
take
up.
the will out and then put everything else in there and then be like, okay, you're just going to move now. All right, move my couch.
You're still aware. You
But
know
you
it's
just
happening.
can't
But
do
the
anything
part
about
that
it.
lets you move your own or stop or
Yeah.
whatever, that's not there.
It's gone. Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then
And
again, like, yeah,
ugh.
stripping the animated spirit out. And that makes more sense as to why Resurrection says the soul is free and willing, because souls can like say, nah, I don't want to go back into that body. That shit sucks. And then
I think that's
cleric is like,
well,
sorry.
there's this long-standing tradition in D&D of murdering people and then bringing them back to life to continue. Because you accidentally killed somebody who had important information.
Right.
And DMs can then say, they know who's trying to res them, and they're like, fuck you.
Fuck you.
I'll
no.
stay dead.
Yeah.
And like...
You're right. That's a good point. Where true
but I
resurrection
think
takes
that
a
that's-
lot of resources to pull off, so it's less likely you're going to true resurrect the bandit over and over again. Like, all right, get
if they're
another
willing to dump
1,000
25k,
yeah.
like into Chad on the street or something, it's like, okay,
All right.
He's probably gonna take that. Like, screw it. I would. I'd be like, this sucks, but like.
So yeah, that world makes some interesting concepts. And so, okay, now we're near the end here, and so I did kind of want to bring up, I guess, like, coming back to, is necromancy evil? And I think that what we've identified here is necromancy is evil when you are doing harm to people without their consent, or manipulating their will without their consent. That is evil. Bringing a body back from the dead isn't evil unless it violates one of those two statutes. Like, if you're bringing a body back from the dead and it's in pain the entire time, that's probably evil. If you're bringing
physically or
mentally, yeah, exactly. If you're bringing a body back and you are ripping the soul to bits and then shoving the bits you want back into the body to create the thing that you want, that's probably evil.
You may need a mustache.
But that is like, inherently, it's the idea of tearing something apart with a will and then using it for your own ends that most moral people have a problem with. It's not necessarily necromancy in the in itself. It's more the violation of will.
Of dead meat.
Right.
That is the problem.
It is,
and I think it is generally agreed upon that that in and of itself isn't the issue. It's just and that if you're trying to make a world where maybe once you get out of the time limit of the commonly available raise dead spells or reincarnation, what have you, people get brought back as zombies because it's nice to have a familiar face around the house or
Right.
something, you know, like how people taxidermy their pets or something.
Yeah, exactly.
You could build a society where it's not looked at as evil because, you know, maybe on some metaphysical level, there's no suffering involved.
Right.
And, you know, there's either a positive connection to the identity. They're allowed to be back and like experience some normalcy in existence, or it's better than like, yeah, in the world where there's no soul, maybe that's better.
Right,
I
even-
guess if you
yeah.
were just switched off, you wouldn't want to come back.
Right.
But you'd probably be glad you were not.
I mean, when
nothing,
you were
I
on,
guess.
you'd be like, I don't want to be off. I like this. But when you're off, you don't care. So
Right, you
there
don't
isn't really a
anything.
downside. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So,
huh.
but
that's-
so
yeah.
there are ways of making necromancy not feel evil in your world. There is no such way for making crap. What's the school of magic?
Enchantment.
There is no way of making enchantment not evil. You can't do it because enchantment at the very base of it is violation of will. It is making someone it's not even like illusion where you're like, oh, there's a pit here, don't walk in the pit, and they're like, oh no, it's a pit, you know, like, okay, you're fooling someone. But
Right.
enchantment is literally like, you like me now, and the person's like, yeah, and it's not because you've made your
Okay.
face look prettier. You've just reached into their mind and grabbed the like string and are now yanking it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's
there isn't a good way to represent a metaphysical system where that isn't evil in the way we understand what evil is. You can say,
Exactly.
oh, you have a soul. Oh, you don't have a soul. The only way where it's really, you can kind of wave away is it, oh, this is a deterministic universe. So I was always going to cast this enchantment spell on you.
I have no more control than you.
I'm
Boop.
also enchanted, but you're the one who's going to be letting me into the keep, even though it means
Right.
you're tortured by the king. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just no way of making it evil. And so again, that's kind of how I wanted to leave the end of this episode is necromancy is only evil because of the parts where it's kind of like enchantment. Otherwise, it's fine, you know.
Or
if
it's
you-
like soul wrangling.
Right,
If it
you
gets
know,
a little
that's-
too soul wrangly, then
it's,
things
you
get
know,
weird,
yeah, but the same with regular ranching, you know, if things get really weird, you're probably ranching wrong, you know, like, but there isn't a good way to view the school of enchantment in a way that isn't just awful. Isn't basically the version of torture we have now, where it's like, okay, yeah, in some situations you'd be like, okay, we have to do this horrifically evil thing to save more people than not, you know, sure, but there is no way where you can be like, oh no, enchantment's the good thing to do. It's
Yeah.
a very evil thing that can sometimes
is.
have good things
It is
that come out of
coercion.
it. It is.
And that is the worst part of what
any-
is bad about necromancy.
Yeah,
like
that's
that it
just
involves
forced
removing
coercion.
people's will. And yeah, and I think that's really on the nail on the head there as far as it's mostly bad when it's like enchantment.
Yes.
And nobody looks at enchantment like, oh yeah, everyone who is an enchanter is literally a magical
evil.
con man.
Right.
Like,
And it's only because the people that are wandering around the enchanter going, aren't rotting. You know, they're just necromancers just have an image problem, man. It's not
exactly. It's
they're
just
not
marketing.
evil.
It's like
just they've been
warlocks,
marketed
you know.
shit.
They're just
Yeah.
clerics with bad marketing.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And so, yeah, enchanters are the evil ones. Enchanters. So if you want to make a magical, system or a world that follows pretty strict moral, like logical reasoning, like we have here in the real world, then yes, enchanters
Those
are
would
the
be right up there.
way the most evilest. Like I don't
Way
care
more
how many.
commonly like people would have to do a lot more work to benefit from necromancy in an
Yes.
normal organized society as we understand it. But the ability to bend someone who's living to your will
Is not
is
a
like
yep.
generally applicable. You can
Yep.
do that in almost every
So
situation.
for instance,
So-
in Paralandia, most enchantment spells are illegal. Most enchantment spells in most countries are illegal or are like, okay, only the state can cast friends on you. And it's only in certain situations where you're like, we need to know the location of the hostage. Friends. Hey, buddy. Yeah, they're down the street, like it's that again, but like most of the governments in Paralandia are like, okay, that's a really evil act, but it's like necessary to protect the people that haven't caused crimes or the innocent.
But if the alternative is, if it's like
Right.
between that and waterboarding or something, it's
Right.
like, okay, maybe that's not as bad
It's
or
not as bad. Yeah,
something,
exactly. We don't have to
but,
attach,
like-
jumper cables to your nipples. We're just going
It's like, it's less,
push the
it's still coercion,
yeah.
but it's at least like, velvet glove.
It doesn't
coercion.
hurt you as much.
Yeah.
You're gonna wake up and be like, hey, you enchanted me. But it's not gonna be like after torture, you're like,
I don't have any fingers.
yeah, exactly. Man, I really missed my fingernails. So yeah, magic in itself comes with some really interesting philosophical ramifications to worlds that I think a lot of DMs, I'm not gonna say that I think a lot of DMs also add to the no. You don't have to add 4 years of philosophy to your games in order to create interesting and insightful worlds and things that are interesting for players to go through. It is, though, a way to approach world building or campaign building in a facet that can lead to more creativity than just being like necromancers are evil because they're zombies around their place.
And I think that you may deal with the resurrection, the afterlife. These sorts of things occasionally come up in games, even if it's not a member of your party that needs to get brought back from the dead or whatever.
Right.
If you have some idea how these mechanics function, it will probably inform on the greater cosmos and the metaphysical hierarchies and so on of the rest of your setting. And yeah, a lot of campaigns, it's maybe not going to be critical information, but if you have one that's turning into that kind of thing, this is, like you were saying, it's a great way to start to answer a lot of really complicated questions by starting with something a little more concrete.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so what happens when you die? And go from there rather than like, how is the entire cosmos? Like, where do I go to find this god's plane or whatever?
It's a good place to start building, like you said, the metaphysical landscape of your world.
Yeah.
And it also, death and necromancy is a good door for your characters to explore that part of your universe as well. Because I have had characters literally kill themselves in order to find objects in the afterlife that they were after. So, it can just be another cave. It can be another dungeon for your players to explore in a way that's more friendly to exploration than just, I guess like not mapping that out or just kind of throwing up your hands and going, you go to hell and there's fire and demons.
It can. Then death isn't the end of the story.
Right.
It's you can use that as your next developing like wrinkle.
And it gives you
Characters that's dead's got to spend some sessions running through random stuff in the afterlife, and everybody else is going around trying to res them or something like that. It's, you have options.
And it also gives you options to run arcs. If you have a certain way your system is set up, and then you're like, okay, but then this god removed this part of the system, and now it's all falling apart, and now your party is intact with replacing it or fixing the system so that people can die again or that kind of thing.
Exactly.
You find interesting ways of running what's actually going on in terms of like the BBEG wants to complete this ritual, but what the ritual actually does is interfere with the way that souls move through the cosmos in this kind of way, which allows your role players to find solutions and things that aren't just, beat him to death and kick over the fancy sculpture that he has.
And if the first time they've interacted with any of that is like, before they kick in the door, then they're probably just going to say, okay, if we kill him, it'll stop.
Right.
Rather than, oh, but I know that if I talk to this deity, they also deal with the way this works, and maybe they'll be on our side, and we can get, so if you've expanded into this realm of like weird metaphysical determination stuff that's already exists, and then you bring in, one of these major arcs, and they were, more familiar with this stuff going on just because there was a necromancer when they were level 2, and it informed on the way dealing with the dead folk works, then I think that that's like going to be bigger and better when you get to your big bad,
Absolutely.
evil at the end.
Yeah, it gives a sense of weight, and it gives a sense of like stakes that wouldn't be there otherwise. All right, well, it is 11:55, and I think that was an excellent way to end off that conversation. Well, thank you guys, those of you that made it through. Appreciate you being here. And so we do this every Thursday, not quite this. This is special. Something like this, though. We've been going through Tasha's Cauldron a lot. We've had a few people on for interviews. We have, we've now talked blue in the face about the metaphysical ramifications of being a necromancer. But join us
we have to talk about illusion and enchantment.
Yeah, I think that we might.
How those get into being evil magic as well.
Yeah, I mean, it would be fun to do a little series on the evils of magic. But yeah, is evocation any different than chemistry or that kind of thing? But we'll announce those as we come up with them. But we also have a stream on Mondays called Old for Gold. We took a break this week, but we're coming back with a brand new arc. They have finished killing the night god, and now they're on to bigger and better things. So, and Surtuk did not die. He did not die. We'll see if I can kill him in the next sessions coming up, but I don't know. He's a slippery one. We also have 2 streams coming up. I believe we have one next Tuesday, or two Tuesdays from now. Not this Tuesday, the following Tuesday.
After next.
We are the Disasternauts. Me, Eric, and John are playing a Starfinder game run by Kyle West, and I play a deadpan philosophy robot. So let me tell you, it's a lot of fun. Yep. We've run a few sessions off stream just to set up backstory, and oh boy, we got some chemistry in the group. So check us out then. And then in a week from tomorrow, we are going to begin the Misadventures of the Accidental Travelers, or what we're also calling the Misadventure series, where we have 3 new characters to take part in the world that the DOP party left behind when they succeeded in founding their own country. We're going to start in the country they founded and continue their story in albeit a little bit different way with some different faces. So tune in about a week for that. Otherwise, we are Irrational Radio. We've got a Discord with a bunch of kind people that will love to answer your questions. We've got a website with a bunch of merchandise, so go buy yourselves a bathtub of dice and enough t-shirts to fill them. And then we also have Patreon. That's right, we have Patreon, where you can get some really cool stuff. I run a game for those who donate $25 or more to the Patreon, and I almost killed them all tonight. So you could get in on that too. Yeah.
Exciting time.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here. We will be back in a week with some more tabletop goodness. So have a good night and see you then. Bye-bye.